It is my opinion that too often gamers associate cost of a video game to a game's length, feeling that if you pay $60 for a game, you should get a ton of play out of it. Sometimes, though, the quality of a game trumps quantity, and this might end up being an unpopular opinion. Developers, too, feel the pressure of justifying the cost of a game, and as a result, may make some bad choices in the game's creation. Padded storylines, needless quests, tacked-on play modes, making me sometimes wonder if the game's price was really worth it. On this episode, we defend, or eviscerate, short video games. Next on Downloadable Content. Welcome to Downloadable Content. I am still Brian. I haven't changed my name. I'm still the host of this show, Brian. And with me, we have Ron.
Hello, everyone.
We have Ben.
Howdy ho.
And we have Rin.
Hey.
There we are.
Yeah.
There we are. Rin lives.
Christmas miracle, everybody.
Yes, I am live.
In a very deadpan voice.
More importantly, we can hear you.
Yes.
Might actually be more important than being alive.
Wait a minute. Aren't those two things aren't mutually exclusive?
Nah, if we get a zombie, that's as long as we can understand their points of view, I think then we would be satisfied with that.
Okay. All right. Well,
as long as the brain munching is cut to a minimum.
That's fine.
Yeah, that would be helpful in most cases. But then again, we don't have too many brains to rub together around here this episode, so it might not be a problem.
No, this is not a massive episode, not like the PAX recap where it was, five or six people fighting for supremacy. Panel so large I had to institute a queue system for the episode.
You should have just had them all fight in Mortal Kombat. That really would have been appropriate and helpful.
Thunderdome, bro. And Thunderdome's always the answer.
Well, combat systems aside, if you want to get in touch with Downloadable Content, there are a variety of ways to do so. You can get a hold of us, facebook.com/dlcontent, on Twitter @dlcontent, on Tumblr, dlcpodcast.tumblr.com, and of course through email, dlcontent1@gmail.com. You can find every episode of Downloadable Content on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher. All of the different ways to get downloadable content into your ears. Take that as you will. So for this episode, we are going to talk in defense, or not, of short video games. Now, this was inspired by an article I read on Game Informer, called It's Over When It's Over, in defense of short games, written by Joe Juba. And it basically talks about what I want to further debate in this episode, which is the idea that sometimes a video game can be really, really good, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 50 or 60 or more hours long. There are certainly games that I feel that are certainly worthy of that. Even some recent examples like Bastion and Transistor, even though they weren't $60, they were $20, which for some can be steep, and they only provide between 8 and 10 hours of gameplay, at least my run-throughs of it. So to open the discussion, what do you, the panel, think of that sort of idea that the quality of a game doesn't necessarily mean it has to be $60, or that $60 sometimes you don't get a whole lot of game out of it?
Well, I mean, there's no debating the fact that sometimes there are games that are really short experiences. I think we've all gone through the moment where you're playing through a game and you don't quite realize you've hit the climactic sequence of the game until suddenly it's already over and you realize the ending credits are rolling in front of you and you weren't quite prepared for that. But you know, it's an understandable problem because you do, you know, $60 is, you know, not an insignificant investment for most people. I don't think most games tend to be impulse buys for a lot of people. So you do want to feel like you're getting your money's worth. But at the same time, I think we also should maybe establish, you know, a game with a short campaign or like a short single player experience, what have you, whatever you want to refer to it as, doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the game. There are still other avenues by which you can extend a title. Obviously there's speed runs and there are other collectibles and things to gather. So I think it's understandable when people feel frustrated that a game is really short, but I don't think there's any kind of real... I think if people are being honest about their assessment, sure, a game's length or lack thereof can be a positive or a negative, but I think that there's no... You could make the argument that in most cases there's not a direct connection between game length and game quality.
Go ahead, Ron.
For me personally,
everybody completely disagrees with me.
No, I sort of agree. For me personally, this might be like a side thing that I want to add on. It's like, for me personally, if a game has a relatively short single player campaign, for me, I'm saying like between 8 and like 12 hours, I would consider that to be a short single player game. However, if the game has a lot of engaging story events going on, not to mention engaging like a combat system or a like level system, if it uses that, I'm more open, or not more open, but like more forgiving of the quality of the game. I think one thing, like for me personally, the last game that I played I thought was short, but I didn't mind being a $60 price tag for it, was the original Bioshock on the 360. Because for me personally, I went through that game and beat it in like 10, 11 hours, and I thought I got my money's worth out of that game.
I mean, that's fair. I can think of a game that was probably 6 hours when I first played it. And I mean, it's really, if you're taking 4 hours to play this game, it's you're probably slowing down. And this was a game that was $50 full price game, but I still think was a fantastic game. Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. I mean, let's anybody who's played that game, you know, if you that's a 3-4 hour game. I think the world record time is something like an hour and a half without skipping anything. So, you know, I don't think that you could really make the argument though that the fact that the game was so short, I mean, to me the negative on there was just I want to play more of this. It didn't take away from what was there in any sense. It just was enough to make me say, great, let's keep this going. But I don't think the length in any way, the pacing was great, the puzzles and the combat served it very well. I don't think there was anything bad about it being short, except it just made me want to play more of the same game. So, was I a little annoyed to see how short it was? Yeah, sure, but the first time it's not really just that short, and it, you know, when you go back, it's a nice experience to be able to go through and just quickly blast through it.
Rian, have you anything to say on that?
I like short games. I don't have time. I just genuinely do not have time to commit to longer games these days, so short games are awesome.
Which is also another very valid assessment. I mean, there's a whole subset of people who play games who, again, don't have the time for long, drawn-out campaigns or what have you. So yeah, I mean, short's the way to go.
Yeah, we at Sprites and Dice, Wyatt and I and John and I were discussing an idea of maybe doing everybody trying to do 3 or 4 games in the month of April. Just blast through them just for the experience of getting through a couple of games quickly and recapping what that feels like. And I know personally, I've picked a couple of my titles based on the fact that they are something that I can beat relatively, I'm going to have a week to get this game done. And I know what a typical week means for me. It means I've got to get an article. It means I've got to do all my other regular work. I might be out on the road traveling, so I don't really know that I'll have even the weekend to catch up. So, I mean, I'm not picking titles purely because they're short, but certainly the length of the game is absolutely a factor for me, just in terms of, do I want to start something new? Can I really devote the time that I want to play a game if I want to go back and revisit something from my library? So, yeah, sometimes, lack of length is a total necessity at this point.
And, yes, I mean, a lot of games nowadays have that thing, the autosave function, so, you don't really need to sit for hours and hours at a stretch. So, I mean, that also helps. But in terms of, in really, really enriching game experience, I mean, we all know, it's no secret, that one of my favorite components of a video game is the story. And I felt, again, I keep going back to the 2 Supergiant games, Bastion and Transistor, because those are the most recent examples that I can think of where you got a really, really full game experience, I felt. And, the game, it's over, each game is less than 10 hours. And, I guess that's one good thing about the games coming out of indie developers, is that I almost never see a game from indie developers that are $50 or $60, so they do have that advantage. But even games like Bioshock, which are typically, the Bioshock series, which are typically, quote, short by today's standards, they feel full. And I think that's where the line comes for developers, is that, okay, you're going to charge that much money for, a AAA game, but can you make it feel like a full game experience? Because the moment you start doing things like padding and the gamer notices it's padding, then we start having an issue.
Yeah, I think if it's a complete experience, that certainly helps with the fact that, you want to feel like you get your money's worth. And, you can certainly tell a story in less than, 50 hours. It doesn't need to be that long of a game. And yeah, sometimes games, that used to be a whole, I remember when we used to compare how anticipated we were for a game, partially by talking about, how long is this game going to take? Well, except, but that does end up coming down to, this is going to be padded, this is going to be something that'll take a lot longer, so it's not really a better game for that, it's just a longer experience.
I think some of that sort of mindset of, how long is this game going to be? And I think that's I think that sort of mindset comes with gamers who are more our age, who grew up on very long PS1 games or Super Nintendo games in which maxing out the timer was seen as some sort of achievement.
Yeah, that's very possible. I can't think of the last game that I played that even has a timer.
Most RPGs do. I know you typically don't play RPGs, but
yeah, that would explain that differentiation.
And I know in games like Metal Gear Solid series, there's another one that although with the exception of like Metal Gear Solid 4, the first 3 games I finished in under 20 hours, and those were full price games. But they also felt really, really loaded.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're talking the Metal Gear series, there is a lot of replayability. There's collectibles, there's there's alternate costumes, there's a lot of stuff there. Now, not everybody's going to go back and get all of that, so then your argument becomes, well, how do you have a fair discussion about what's the actual length of a game? But there is plenty in there. But the Metal Gear series is even another one. Somebody on, I want to say it was IGN, and this was probably like 2002 or so, somebody wrote a whole article. There was a discussion about games, and they highlighted Metal Gear specifically, where they were like, I was waiting for this event that I was supposed to care about, that I didn't care about in the game, because I was thinking, man, I just have other games to get to. And part of that, yeah, comes into padding, but if your game is so long that it's actively taking away from the enjoyment of either that title or others, I think you've clearly missed the mark somewhere.
Agreed. I mean, we've probably all played games where we have felt where it reaches a point where it's like, okay, come on, be done already. For me, that was Final Fantasy 13, or Xenosaga Episode 2, or Dragon Quest 7. My God, that game was a perfect example of way too much padding. I don't know how many of you have ever played any of the Dragon Quest games, but 7 was by far the worst. It is probably one of the longest games I ever played. I think I almost took 100 hours, and that was just getting through the main story.
Yeah, that's a little ridiculous, if you ask me.
Go on.
I was going to say that, as I think back and look on it, most of the games in the NES and Super Nintendo era were pretty short. By and large, probably 5 or 6 hours. And the only reason that they felt like they were so long was because they were really fucking hard. And you had to die, and there was, generally speaking, no save system back then. So when you died and saw Game Over Screen, you had to start over from the beginning.
Well, yeah, it's like Mega Man. It's like 5 or 6 levels, but it feels like a 95-hour game with how many times you die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
or
part of that was also
some of the platforming is.
Yeah, and part of the reason NES games were short was space constraints, which obviously is no longer an issue at this point. But yeah, I mean, that's difficulty is certainly one way to extend the replayability, but that's also, that's a stall tactic, because in theory, the players, if they keep playing, are going to get to the point where they learn the tricks, they learn the enemy patterns, and then they can, power through the levels a little bit more easily. So that helps extend it, I think, to a point, but there does come a point where it's like, cool, you're a pain in the ass, but I know how to deal with it, so what do you got?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of it. Give me a moment here. I'm trying to think of a game that a more modern game that I did not like the price tag for what I paid for the length of it.
As the lazy Susan of his brain tries to figure out.
I'd probably go with Bioshock 2, actually, which is basically just reusing Bioshock 1 and just putting a different spin on the story that really didn't add much to the overall world of the game. Yeah, Bioshock 2. Final Fantasy 13 was very long. They didn't need to be as long as it was. The Order 1886, I have not played it, but from all accounts, that game was way too short and not worth the $60 price tag.
Let's see. I mean, I don't know about more modern games, but I remember back in the PlayStation era that the classic Resident Evil games, for example, and the first Silent Hill, I was kind of a little annoyed that a $50 game and each Resident Evil game only took about 5 or 6 hours. But again, we were dealing with a PlayStation 1 disc, and space constraints were still an issue, but not that much of an issue when you have games like Final Fantasy VII, which were 3 discs. 8 and 9 were.
Yeah, again, there was a point at which it was this is a problem because we don't have the room, and then there was a point at which it was we did this because this was, quite frankly, all the game we could think of to fit in here.
And, I don't know, since I don't play these games, I don't know if games like Halo or Call of Duty or Battlefield suffer from, this sort of feeling that that these games are being padded.
Well, I think the focus on those games specifically is more on the multiplayer experience, so I don't really know that qualifies. I mean, put into a context that would, be a better parallel for you would be, any of the Smash Brothers games. Like, you wouldn't complain that Brawl was too short just because the Subspace Emissary was a short experience, right? I mean, that's not the primary reason you bought the game. You bought the game, I'm assuming, mostly for the multiplayer experience. And a lot of times with those first-person shooters, that's what people are buying it for. I mean, if they stopped coming with single-player campaigns, I don't think actually too many people would even be that upset. I think the real focus there is the multiplayer modes, and then it becomes that much harder to judge. It's not about length at that point, it's just about how interesting is this even after an extended period of time. Which honestly has a lot to do also with the other players rather than just the game itself.
Fair enough. Ren, you could come in at any time. You don't have to stay quiet out there in the far land of the internet. Just saying.
Yeah, I just listen more than I talk. I mean, like I said, I just don't have a lot of time to devote to things, and most RPGs are usually clocking in around 30 hours, and I'm just like, do I have time for that these days? I've just been playing a lot of the Supergiant games because they're actually pretty short. So I've been doing Transistor, and I did Bastion, also short. I can handle short, well-done games.
Well, I mean, also, to further, Transistor. Transistor does something to add replayability. They do what Chrono Trigger does. They have the New Game Plus feature. And while I have yet to exploit the New Game Plus on Transistor, I do remember playing on the New Game Plus for Chrono Trigger, and okay, so maybe it throws the game's balance off a bit, but it's still a heck of a lot of fun, and I think, there are ways to get more enjoyment out of a game rather than just, tack on, padded quests or game modes like that, and I think New Game Plus, also the writer of the article agrees as well, says that, New Game Plus is probably the perfect way to increase the playability of a game without making it feel like padding.
Yeah, I mean, that makes some sense. But I think it's also, I don't know, I feel like the games, I mean, mostly because it tends to be an RPG thing, but it is kind of funny that the games that tend to feature New Game Plus are already the games that are extremely long titles. I mean, it's so I'm cheating. I have Speed Demos archive up in front of me, and the game that I was thinking of as like one of the longest games that I've ever played was Tales of Symphonia. And according to Speed Demos, the record time that they have for that game on a speed run is still 8 hours. And if you think about all the exploits and all the other things that players can go through, I haven't seen the video, so I don't know, if it's just we know exactly what we're doing and we're just going through everything, or if it's we're gonna use some exploits and other things to get through it. That's another game that does feature a New Game Plus. And with New Game Plus, it does add something to the experience because you're gonna get to see everything again from another point of view. But it's like, it's like running through Resident Evil 4 after you've unlocked any of the super weapons is one. It's not really a New Game Plus, but it is really basically a New Game Plus. It's a completely different experience, and at that point, you're not getting the same experience you're getting from the game. I think at that point you're getting, I don't know, it's way easier. It's fun for totally different reasons, but usually the challenge is just not there, at least through Resident Evil. In RPGs or any other games, maybe they do up the enemy difficulty to scale, but again, there comes a point where you're gonna probably be able to max out and get to a point where the AI I just wouldn't think would be all that challenging.
Some of the more recent games I know are being better about challenging AI. Like, I'm playing through Persona Q right now, which is a 3DS game based on the Persona series from what the hell are they? Alice? Yeah, Alice. And the AI is definitely improving based upon like enemies of where I'm at in the game. Like, enemies will actively use, like, if they have an attack that hits a weakness of my character, they'll definitely spam that ability until the character is dead and buried, which makes for particularly interesting random encounter battles. But it's definitely something that they could use to improve upon or increase difficulty in various games, whether it's RPGs or action games or things like that.
Has anyone ever played the game Mirror's Edge?
Yeah. I own it.
Not all the way through, but a chunk of it.
That's one game that I've been wanting to play, but gets the flack for being a short game. I want to play it. I've never played it.
It definitely is a short game. For me, I actually got Mirror's Edge day one of when it came out, and I enjoyed it. I don't think it was $60 worth. It's probably closer to $40, maybe $35 in terms of like a value. Just because like the artistic style of the game, the parkour aspect of it, I really enjoyed, but the length of it, along with how repetitive some of the parkour was at the end of near the end of the game, that made it drag on a bit more than I thought it should have. Also, the whole fact that they didn't really reward you if you did fight back, and you were basically just your whole point of the game was basically just like you running and parkouring all over the place, which made for a very cool like visual from like a first-person view. Like, I'm sure if it hasn't been done already, someone's gonna put this thing in an Oculus Rift and then give you the controller, and you're gonna get freaking vertigo and vomit all over the place. And this is gonna be like a really amazing game to have for the Oculus Rift.
Well, there you go. You said, I mean, here was a game that, was short, and you just said it yourself, that it really wasn't, you didn't, it was, by your comparison, too short, and, wasn't worth the $60. There are gamers out there that I'm sure that if the game is perceived to be too short, they won't even touch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, like we were saying, the investment is financially just not worth it. It's they know these are people who obviously have the time to go through titles, and that's great for them. But it's exactly that. It's a financial investment, and there's you can argue the same thing. People sometimes complain about movies being a little less than say 2 hours on normal runtime. It's, well, I'm paying all this money. I think it's just we expect a specific. It's like a formula we have in our heads. I am putting in X in terms of an investment, X being dollars, time, whatever it's going to be. I'm expecting Y out of it. This much enjoyment, this much time of enjoying it, and then you can fudge that a little bit if it's maybe not as phenomenal, but a little longer. I think people sometimes are okay with that. Then you start slipping the other way. It goes on too long, and then people get upset with that. Then it's, I don't care. I know I'm paying for it, but I don't want it to be this long. So I think we have in our heads like a predefined formula of, if I put in this much, this is what I'm supposed to get back. So for some people, that is the, I want the short games. For some people, it's, well, if the game is less than 12 hours, then, it's totally not worth the $60. And you don't know everybody's situation. Maybe it's somebody who is working minimum wage. So it's literally, well, how many hours do I have to work to be able to afford this game? And if it's not going to entertain me for the same number of hours that I have to work to buy it, what is the point? And that's a completely rational argument that I can't really find much fault with.
That would be me.
Yeah, there you go. So exactly, if I'm going to spend more time working to pay for something than I'm going to be spending enjoying it, then that is a massive net loss. And yeah, of course I wouldn't want to invest in that. There's no reason to.
I certainly understand, the enjoyment versus cost and, money situation thing, but, that aside, I mean, if you had say you do have, the money and the time to devote to, copious amounts of video game playing, doesn't the it seems like the mindset that you're just going to dismiss all games that are, that are not, that can be completed in, say 10 hours or less. That's sort of a pretty, broad mindset to just wipe all games from your library because they are short. From a developer's perspective, sometimes you don't need that long of a game to, tell your story or get your point across. It just seems like a pretty sort of, naive or damaging mindset.
I mean, yeah, you are immediately out of hand dismissing what potentially it could be a decent chunk of titles, but I mean, people are closed-minded about lots of things, unfortunately.
Well,
I mean, again, if you're literally talking, okay, the number of hours that I have to work for this game will not be the same as the number of hours that the game will entertain me for, and there's no other reason, that I can understand people dismissing it out of hand for just that reason. If there's some other reason to keep them interested, then maybe it's worth a discussion about it, but otherwise it's, okay, well, that's how you feel about it, that's perfectly valid. Yeah, it's not worth it to try and get somebody to play. Because that's the thing. Let's say I told you in advance, okay, you're going to buy this game, it's going to be $60, and it's going to take you 4 hours to beat, but you're going to love it. The whole time you're playing, that's going to be in the back of your mind. Oh, well, cool, it's been a great hour, but that means I'm already 25% done with the game. It can sour the experience in for some people. So, if I had the time, I would play, games that are long and games that are short. But I can understand, especially being in a case where I do have limited time, people saying, no, I don't want to play a game that's going to fit this standard. Whether the standard is it's too short or it's too long or whatever the case may be, because I want to devote the limited time I have to games that, I feel I will appreciate more.
And that's certainly a valid point. I mean, definitely I can understand the financial aspect of things. And also this is a big reason why I typically don't read video game reviews, because if one of the reviewers' complaints is they feel the game's too short, then it's like, oh well, now you've just influenced my decision whether to purchase the game or not. But that's my own take on that. Then you have games which you really get your money's worth. The one that's jumping into my brain the quickest is Skyrim. I have never played any of the Elder Scrolls games, so this is the first type of RPG that I've ever played in which you have pretty much a truly open world. And I've probably sank over 100 hours into that game, and I still have barely scratched the surface. Now, for some, that might be too much game, if such a concept even exists, where, the game world is just so overwhelming that it kind of has the same effect for somebody who thinks that the game is too short, that there's way too much game, it's overwhelming, I don't know where to go.
Yeah, a lot of times I have that problem with open world games. Like, Grand Theft Auto, it's like, great, you can go do anything. Okay, so what should I do now? Anything you want to. But what should I do? Anything you want to. Alright, cool. I want to put in a different game now. Bye. It's just, give me some kind of direction. Now, some people would be like, no, this is a great infinite open sandbox, and I want to do all of the things constantly, and I'll find something new to do. But for me, it probably would be a little bit too much game. I've accidentally beaten a game. I don't want to say accidentally beaten a game, but when I was playing through Skyward Sword, I was going through and I thought, without realizing it, I just kept going from story point to story point, and I thought, gee, are there any side quests in this game? And then I was practically done with the game before I realized, oh wait, yeah, I've just been ignoring them the whole time. So for me, yeah, sometimes a little more focus and a little less, massive open world isn't a bad thing.
Ron, you can also jump in too. I kind of feel like Ben and I have just
Brian, do you want to switch this to a video call? We'll just a little more intimate
I'm
with
just
it.
like, it's just like it's a rather interesting concept of like people are ignoring games because they feel they're too short. Now I can understand if they're doing it for monetary reasons, like if they just don't have the say they have a very limited budget for video gaming and they don't want to spend money on a game they feel they wouldn't get their money's worth out of or time investment out of. Like I can understand that, but it's like the people feel that they won't play a video game because it's too short, even though they have the time, money, and even desire to play the game. But like on principle that they're not going to play it. Like that just seems asinine and dumb, and you guys shouldn't even call yourselves gamers.
I mean, I don't know that I'd go that far, but I mean,
Well, that's Ron's story, and he's sticking with it. Damn it!
Yeah. All right. Holy. Wow. Okay. Listen. Just because you're, I mean, I can understand that point of view. I'm not a big fan of dismissing anything out of hand, whether it happens to be short games or people who really don't like short games. But I don't know. I would think that, yeah, you're still going to have some games that are very short but still very worth their time, and it's worth checking them out regardless. But I don't know that, I don't know that anybody's going to win that argument of we should totally dismiss short games, we shouldn't totally dismiss short games. Like, they're, as we said, perfectly valid reasons for why you would not want to play a game if you don't feel like it's going to be financially worth the investment, or however you want to look at it, worth the investment.
Now, here's a question for you, Rin. Does this problem exist? I can't, since I don't play these games. What about MMOs? Does it reach a point where it kind of feels like the game is padding, or that...
God, yeah. Oh, yeah. All the time. All the time. It's endless. Like, I quit a lot of MMOs because it's just content that doesn't do anything. It doesn't forward the storyline. It's just 12 more quests, some upgrades that are minor upgrades that you don't actually need, that aren't going to do you much good unless you're actually in a scenario where you would need it. But if you're just logging on to do basic things and not like high-end raiding, you're never going to notice. So it's just constantly adding stuff that doesn't serve a point. Also known as every Warcraft patch.
I was just about to say, is this a war crack gripe?
No, it's
this
almost
is
every
an
MMO.
MMO.
They all add patches that are just...
Yeah.
This is MMOs in general. This is broad. Yeah. This is just every MMO. They just do that. It's what they do. It's when they don't have content that is large enough to warrant an entire patch to forward the game's story, they'll add 7 quests. They'll add some armor skins. They'll add whatever they feel like they can get away with calling a patch update along with fixing bugs, without just calling it, we're fixing some bugs.
Yeah, every MMO is pretty much subject to this. The only one I would say that probably isn't is, at least to my knowledge, would be Final Fantasy 14. With, when they did the relaunch of it, where they basically said, here's our schedule of major patches. And, like, they like, patch 2.1, they added some new storyline and some new bosses and some new content. And then 2.2, they did the exact same thing. And, like, sure, there were maybe, like, small patches along the way to fix bugs and things like that. But, like, you knew, generally speaking, every time, like, they did a major number patch, like, there's going to be something new added to the game that would give some more life to the game. And it was, and now they're about to do their first expansion like you're gonna get even more access to more stuff, and like that's definitely a game that I feel from an MMO aspect, like you definitely could put money down on it and buy it and even play multiple months out of it, and I think you would get your money's worth out of it.
Now, Rin and Ron, that's going to get confusing really quickly. Do you think that the developers who do the MMOs do these, BS sort of patches, as it were, upgrades or have you, because these games are usually on a subscription model and they feel that they need to provide new content, just to, quote, justify the cost? Because MMOs, a good chunk of them are a really heavy investment.
Generally speaking, sometimes, like, Final Fantasy XIV is a subscription model. So you gotta pay every month to keep playing the game. But, like, where that money is going into, generally speaking, right away, because of the relatively consistent, like, update schedule that Square Enix has had for the game. Other games, you put money into it, and you have no clue where it is going. Like, I played an MMO called Ion that came out back in, like, 2011, 2011, and I subscribed to that, and I had no clue where my money was going into. Literally no idea. Whether it was going into the freaking pit of Satan or the garbage dump where Atari's what ET cartridges were at, I had no clue that money was going. I think it actually ended up going to the investors and the company's pocketbook, but that's about it. And my money was used to buy someone's Ferrari, but I have no proof of that.
What about you, Rin? I mean, eventually, I guess it would reach a point where you can't justify shelling out $14-15 a month anymore.
Yep, that's why I quit my subscription-based MMOs. I just couldn't justify it. I'm like, this is pointless. So I bought Guild Wars 2 when it was on sale for $10, and that's like perma-free. So awesome.
That's another game that a lot of my friends play, which I've never even touched.
Some of the Guild Wars, some of the other MMOs nowadays are moving away from that subscription model. Not many of them are, but it is a slowly growing thing where you just plunk down $60 for the game or $10 if it's on sale, and whatever money you spend on it will be for like cosmetic skins, or depending upon how it's going to depend really on how the company wants to run their cash shop. Like for Guild Wars, if you're putting money into the game, it's generally for skins, or you're paying for like a server transfer or a name change or something like that. Other games you would put money in and you'll get like an experience boost, so you'll get access to a class that you would normally not have access to, or would take you a long time to get access to, from like leveling or doing progression throughout the story in the game.
Alrighty, and unfortunately, Ben has run out of time. He has to go bugger off and leave us.
Goku, don't leave us. We need you to defeat Majin Buu.
It's okay, I'll spirit bomb the Earth later on, I promise, guys.
Yay!
Alright.
Alrighty, well thank you, Ben, for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
And I guess with Ben going away, that'll be a good time for us to cut out and bring this first half to a close. On our second half, we will talk about probably some of the good and bad short games that you can play. We'll give you our thoughts on those, and we will very likely have a Wyatt joining us in the second half. But in the meantime, you'll have some music, as is our custom, and with that, You are listening to Downloadable Content. We'll be back. Welcome back to Downloadable Content, talking about short games, whether you like them or hate them. We had some pretty good discussion in the first half, covering a wide range of topics, closing on MMOs before Ben left. But we bring on Ben's replacement in this second half. We welcome Wyatt back.
Hello.
I said Wyatt, not James.
Oh, James does that too, but he's not German.
No, he's not, and he's never been on an episode of Downloadable Content, so, I mean, if
Fair.
There! You can lord that over him.
That and killing him in Dungeons and Dragons, but hey.
You haven't done that yet. You've tried to, but not yet.
I'm sorry, before you showed up.
This plan would have worked if it weren't for you meddling kids. Anyway, so, again, the topic of the episode, Wyatt, just to catch you up, is the fact that, to some gamers, the fact that that games are typically $50 or $60 means that you have to justify that expense with length, which isn't always necessarily the case. And we were talking about some games that you can get a really good full experience even though you've paid full price for them, without them needing to be 50 or 60 or more hours long. So that's basically
right, absolutely.
that's basically kind of where we're going. I know, well, something we talked about in the first half. There obviously Ben brought up a very good point about sometimes if you're a person with limited income, then sometimes you might end up dismissing short games because cost of game versus how much enjoyment you're going to get out of it. Something like that. But then also I brought up the point that if you are a person who has the money and time to play a lot of video games, you shouldn't just dismiss short games right out of hand.
Oh, yeah. Now, I don't want to talk over other people. I know that you guys already talked about Transistor and Bastion, which are two great examples of really fulfilling experiences that, they've got a good bit of meat on them. They're not like, 2 or 3 hours long. They've got a bit of distance to them, but they are relatively short in comparison to what a lot of people think of as being a huge meaty game. Those are two great examples of that, and I think, just not to exposition too much, but I feel like gaming's in a really weird place this way because the value of a game is really up for grabs for a lot of people. I constantly see reviews, things like MMOs. And MMOs always, as you guys were talking about before, are always judged for having too much filler. RPGs, like JRPGs especially, that used to be loved for things like their random battles and constant grind, are now kind of being more and more pushed to the side, saying we don't want to have that grind anymore. It's becoming less and less of a gamer's favorite thing to do. At the same time, a lot of games that are too small, people are going, oh, well, how dare you make a small game when I can get all this other content, namely through like multiplayer and otherwise. It's this very weird thing that's happening where people are very much arguing against filler and really long games that feel like they have filler, but at the same time they're going, oh, this game's underneath 6 hours or underneath 8 hours, why would I want to spend 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks on it? And it's really weird where like kind of the pricing is.
I think to further elaborate on that point, I think the rise, as it were, of so many indie games where they can offer enriching gameplay for far less than their AAA counterparts kind of throws a wrench into the whole works. I mean, what we grew up with was games coming only from major developers, and they were between 40 and 50, and thank you Microsoft for pushing it up to the $60 barrier. That's all we had to go on for decades. And now you have these indie developers who are only charging between $5 and $20, and for really, really packed gameplay, which is kind of throwing a wrench into the classic business model.
I'm going to go back to a game that I love, State of Decay. Has anyone played it?
I have not.
I have not either.
State of Decay, zombie survival game, sort of sandbox. It was made by sort of an indie developer, but it was published by Microsoft underneath their banner. Really awesome zombie game where it's all about the survival method, not so much like, oh good, there's zombies everywhere. It's more, no, there's zombies, you have to make a house and constantly survive. It's not about the jump scare, it's about the constant there have been zombies. Now, when you play through the campaign mode, once you've beaten it once, you can bang out that thing in about probably 3 or 4 hours, or maybe even 5. No, I'm being selling a little too short, like 3 to 6 or 3 to 8 hours if you want to go just through that rough kind of plot line. But I only had to buy the game originally for $20. Now I'm just going to look it up right now on Steam to see where it's at right now. It's $20 again on Steam right now. So I bought the game on Xbox Live for $20. Said this is a really good game. And then when I saw the expansions came out, I rebought the game for Steam for $20, and I bought the expansions for another like 5 or 10. I think they were on sale. And I feel like I still got my money's worth. So I was able to buy 2 indie games, play through the and really kind of get my details worth because it was an indie game. I was willing to actually purchase it multiple times. I think it's very interesting that indie games, they're filling this really weird niche. Bastion I've bought on both Xbox Live and PC.
And I mean, so, well, also at the same time, you are supporting an indie developer by buying the same game multiple times on different platforms, whereas you probably wouldn't do that for a AAA title. I mean, you wouldn't buy like $60 $50 version of Mass Effect on your Xbox and then buy the same game for your PS3. So, what's the difference there? Aside from cost, that you're willing to shell out money to buy multiple copies of the same game across different platforms from an indie developer, whereas you wouldn't do the same for a AAA title.
Right. Part of that is that price point, I guess. Yeah, this is another place. I mean, we were talking about broken games and stuff like that, Brian, last time I was on one of these. And this is, again, where AAA games are kind of getting shoved into the back, right? I mean, they're kind of getting a raw deal. Because indie games are able to kind of go into this middle point and just where they go, yeah, we'll give you 6 to 10 hours worth of solid content if you want to rush this or even take your time with it, but we'll sell it to you for 15, 20, 25 bucks. And people go, of course I'll spend that.
Well, I mean, it's just, what I'm getting at is, you just said you bought Bastion for, on 2 separate platforms.
Yes.
Now, it's the same game, and as far as I know, there's no fundamental difference between the 2 versions. But is there any reason other than price where you would do that for an indie title, as opposed to doing again for a AAA title?
I mean, okay, so sometimes there are benefits for buying it on more than one platform. For example, when I got myself a new laptop, that's one reason why I started rebuying games and kind of filling out my Steam library, because I just wanted to have it all in one place where I can, carry the games with me, and because I could get some better graphics. My Xbox was aging. But when I went to go restock my games, I immediately went to the indie section. Hey, look, this is 15, this is 10, this is 5. Especially when the Steam sale hits, but that's a totally other story. And it was very easy for me to purchase these other games. Now, I know when Bastion, when you buy it on the PC, you can get the soundtrack along with it, which is fantastic. I love the soundtrack. I believe you could get the Portal turret as like an extra expansion. Sometimes whenever you buy something on the second console, it does come with like a little extra kind of deal sweetener, like, oh, here's an exclusive little bit. But that's only going to tempt me for a game that's only 15 to 20 bucks, or even 25. As soon as you're going to that $50 or $60, that feels like, maybe it's the old console idea of, those big game exclusives, quote unquote.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, when you're talking about a AAA title, you're talking about $100 to $120 or more if you're going across multiple platforms. I mean, most major releases on the consoles are going to be spread out among them. We do not live in a gaming era anymore where the emphasis is on exclusives. I mean, yes, each console will have, maybe a small pocket of its own exclusives, but now really, I mean, if you own one console, they pretty much have identical libraries at this point.
Right.
And so, I mean, there are many, many ways to get those types of games, but, at the same time, you spend $50 or $60 on a game, I mean, you could still feel like you got a really good, solid game out of that. I mean, Ben and I were talking about Metal Gear Solid in the first half, as an example. I mean, those games, with the exception of Metal Gear Solid 4, I finished those each game in less than 15 hours. But I felt that I got a really good, solid play out of it. Going back further into gaming history, I spent $50 on Resident Evil 3. That game's 5 hours.
Right. So actually, that was something I kind of wanted to go with there. Was the games that are single-player based, they're very story-based, and it's figuring them out. So the first time you play through a Resident Evil, or the first time you play through a Devil May Cry, so let's go into a franchise I know, and you pull out your sword and your gun, and you're like, okay, let's figure this out. And you start getting Devil May Cry 3, you get your ass kicked repeatedly in that game until you figure out the bosses, you figure out the puzzles, and you figure out the playstyle until you become really good at it. So the first time you play through, it's 8, 9, 10 hours long. But then you can go back through those same zones, you skip through the story cutscenes, and you start blazing through and replaying levels, and you can now beat the game there's even achievements. Beat the game in 2 hours or less, or whatever. Does that detract from the game, or am I really getting my solid enjoyment out of it? I mean, part of it is sort of when you read a book the first time, it takes you longer, but then you read through the book the second time, and you can really kind of see all the little nuances or things you missed the first time. Sometimes in games, there's a benefit for playing through a second time. And something that always ticked me off when I was kind of growing up and seeing was that I'd go read a review, and they'd be like, oh, this is a really good game. It's a little bit short, but it's a good, solid game. And so that you'd see that review often, right? I think everyone has. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, but if you were to go into the comments section of like IGN or GameSpot, you would go down, and one of the first few comments would be, meh, too short game. Beat it in like 5 hours. I bought it at midnight, beat it by 4:30 a.m. Lame. And that'd be one of the first comments you would always see.
Well, you still see that. I mean, I was, as I was doing my research for this episode, I came across somebody's gaming blog, and it's just a list of games that they played and enjoyed, but they automatically dislike and say that no one should ever play these because you plunk down $60 and you get a very short game. I mentioned Mirror's Edge in the first half, as one of those games. Another. Let me pull up that blog again. Okay, well, now I have to do that with a cat on me. Yes. Bailey, get your paw off the keyboard. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, just the first couple of sentences in this particular gaming blog, who I will not name, says, I get really pissed off when I throw down good money on a new game and it ends up being less than 8 hours long. If your game is 8 hours and it's decent, you'll get a pass. But if it is under 8 hours, it better blow my mind from the first frame to the last, or I'll make an evil face, hiss at it, and bring it back for full refund to GameStop. That is the curse of short games. I make sure they get none of my money. And so the game...
Okay, so that's only a little bit...
Say that again?
It's only a little bit entitled. Just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing that I mentioned in the intro, that opinion exists, that if a game is short, that there is a nice chunk of the gamer population that'll just dismiss it right out, just for the fact that it's short. And the games that they list here, let's see, Asura's Wrath, which I've never heard of,
I have, yeah.
Yeah, Star Fox 64. Now, come on. That game has so much replay value, it's not even funny. Wanted, Weapons of Fate, Star Wars Force Unleashed 2, and Mirror's Edge, there it is again, and Quantum of Solace, which was a James Bond game. So, those were the games, on this particular blog's short list. And again, I think that sort of mindset hurts developers eventually, because now you have, if developers get feedback saying that your game was too short, now for their next game it has sort of a negative effect, going, okay, well, if we're charging $60 for this game, we have to pad it. So I mean, what it comes down to through this, as it all boils down to, is that there has to be a balancing act. And some, there are some developers in games that nail it, and some that feel like we need to pad this game out because if we don't, we're going to get bad reviews.
Right, and it's like I said, that's the weird place game design is in right now. You have people saying there's too much filler. Why was there that extra level where I was repeating the exact same thing I was doing before? You then have people saying, how dare you... Yeah, the normal hours I see is 8 hours. That is actually the number I see quoted the most as, like, the main one you have to beat. If you beat it in under 8 hours, people yell. It's not just that blog, but just in general when I see comments. Sometimes I see 6, but usually, like, that's 6 to 8 hours is starting to consider to be too short for a lot of gamers, especially for AAA titles. And my question is, how much enjoyment are you going to get out of it? I'm more worried about the quality of the game, and am I going to appreciate those hours for later? Like, I beat Devil May Cry, the new one, the DMC, by Ninja Theory. I probably beat that one in about 7 hours, the first time I played through it. But I enjoyed every minute of it, because it was just a fantastic ride for me, and I liked the cutscenes. Some of them were a little bit silly, but that's Devil May Cry for you. You enjoy it, and then you go back through it, and you start back over it, and you start getting better at the game, because you want to enjoy it. It's a game. It's not a movie. I mean, let's look at monetary value. That's something that I always did when I was a kid. When my parents would tell me, why would you want to spend $50 on a video game? I would say, well, I'm going to play this video game for, let's just use a very short version, or quote-unquote short version, 10 hours. And then I would tell them, how much am I going to spend when I go out to get a good meal? How long does it take for me to finish that meal? Or go to the movies. That's another example.
And and that's true. You have to determine your enjoyment versus finances and whatnot. And as was mentioned in the first half, there are people who cannot afford to shell out $50 or $60 for a game, and therefore have to really weigh how much in time they're going to get out of a game, and I fully understand that. I've been there.
Yeah.
I'm currently there, and this is why I haven't purchased any really AAA titles in a long time. And then you have people like Rin who love short games because the longer games are too much of a time sink, which is kind of like the reverse problem.
Right, and that's sort of the other factor in my life is I'm now an adult. I have a full-time job, and I'm working for Sprites and Dice. So actually, when I'm trying to review games, I have a hard time when I'm not trying to review a game to sit down and be like, I'm just going to relax. Now what am I going to play? So it's interesting that the older I get, the more I can appreciate for games and be like, I want to have a nice, compact, really fun time. While I was younger, I definitely, when I stayed up at 3 or 4 in the morning playing just one video game, I liked the games like Final Fantasy Tactics or Decay, where it was like, you have to spend 300 hours in order to make a perfect character. That's like, well, that sounds like fun. Now that sounds like a nightmare.
Now it's like, oh fuck, this is homework. Damn it, this game isn't a game anymore. Then it becomes work, and that which leads into another point. Any game that I feel loses the enjoyment and becomes work is not really fun to play anymore. It's like, okay, for me, Final Fantasy II had this problem. As I mentioned, Dragon Warrior 7 had this problem. Xenosaga 2 had this problem.
Right.
And
personally, I think...
Go ahead.
You finish your point, because I'm going to make a different point.
Oh, I was just saying that you guys talked about this during the MMO argument. I've played MMOs for years off and on, and I even still play one or two now, but since they're more free to play, I can jump on them. I play them and I enjoy the grind. I'm going to go out to a zone, I'm going to do the quest, I'm going to finish the levels and feel like I'm getting somewhere. But then as soon as I get to that point where I'm like, this is becoming homework, I stop. But yeah, so there is definitely an enjoyment to the grind. That's still definitely an old-fashioned gamer enjoyment, like in Dark Souls, where you play a game till you get good, better, just improve yourself. But yeah, there's definitely some times where you just don't have the time for that anymore once you become an adult or have a full-time job or go to college.
And, again, well, especially for the ones that you have to pay for a subscription. It's like, there comes a point where you can no longer justify the expense.
Right.
So. And we touched upon this earlier. The other, then you have games where that you shell out $60 for, and there's too much game, like the really open world games, sandboxy games where it's like, holy shit, what the hell do I do?
Right. Minecraft. I will not touch Minecraft. I know it'll be a great value, but no, I'm not touching that game. I'm sorry, I need my free time. I'm getting married soon.
What? You don't want to sink your time into a complete open sandbox?
I do. That's the problem.
So he does, but the problem is, once he does, you're not going to see him for about 3 weeks.
Yeah, just like any Elder Scrolls games.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, I think I lost...
Exactly. It's like
I think I lost you for a month and a half with State of Decay, though.
it was a while ago. I think that was the case. I got State of Decay, and I just really enjoyed myself for like about a week and a half. I just lost myself to it. You're right. That was 2 summers ago now? Yeah.
Something like that. Okay, they did have a booth at PAX East. I don't know if you got there this year, but or at least I don't.
I had an interview about their new game, but that's neither here nor there.
Yep. So, I want to shift gears, as we have some time left in this episode, to talk about, just go around the group here to talk about maybe a couple from each, to talk about some good short games that people can play if they haven't already played them. And, well, we've already mentioned some big ones, Bastion and Transistor and them, so, I'm always a fan of the Behemoth games.
Yes.
I'm always a fan of the Behemoth games, Castle Crashers and Battle Block Theater, which are both amazingly good platforming goodness. Yeah, I think it was Ben who introduced me to Portal. I hate puzzle games. But he threw Portal at me, and suddenly, 5 hours later, I'm like, what the fuck? Where did the time go? And again, it was GLaDOS' commentary that just kept me going through the game.
Right.
I'm just trying to think. I should just pull up my Steam library and go from there. The Stanley Parable.
I still haven't played that one.
There's a game...
For me, most of the,
Go on.
I'll say, for me, most of the Metroid games, like, specifically Metroid 1, Metroid 2, Super Metroid, there are remakes of them, so they're on Game Boy Advance, so it's Metroid Zero Mission, Metroid Fusion as well. Those are all very good quality games that you could beat in like 2 or 3 hours. Most of the Mega Man games as well, specifically like Mega Man X through probably X4, you can probably beat in 4 hours if you're not trying to rush it. But if you're speedrunning it, you'll probably beat it in like an hour, if at that.
Yes. Metroid, he says, as a short game. Yes, just because the guy from Bit Brigade beat the original Metroid in 39 minutes, I don't care.
That bastard.
It takes me more than 39 minutes to move beyond the first few screens of that game, it seems like.
Listen, when you have the screen memorized, so you know the exact pixel that you need to jump on to get to the heart container, the energy tank, and while shooting the guy, that's gonna kill you if you don't get the energy tank.
Frickin' rote memorization. Yes, by that logic, you could also consider the original Legend of Zelda a, quote, short...
I'll say it's literally muscle memory.
At that 45 minutes to beat the original Legend of Zelda. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Okay, thanks, you fucking asshole. But... jerk. What about you over there, Rin? What do you think of what you've mentioned in the first half that you love short games? What are some besides Bastion and Transistor? Because we've mentioned them ad nauseum in this episode.
I haven't honestly actually had time to play much of anything. God, what was the last game I played?
Or in recent memory, at any rate.
God, oh, jeez. Chrono Cross was short. That's not very recent. I'm screwed. Fuck.
I haven't played Chrono Cross in years.
It was short though, if I recall. It was like 19 hours tops to beat the damn thing. Pretty short.
Digging back into the PS1 pool.
I couldn't think of anything. That's what I do.
That's all right. That's all right. I mean, freaking Ron's talking about Mega Man and Metroid and. Yes, Metroid is a short game. Oh, I'm just sure. Although I am currently replaying Chrono Trigger for the upcoming downloadable content where we celebrate Chrono Trigger's 20th anniversary. Going through that game again. Trying to think. Oh yes, I did say I was going to pull up my Steam library. Because there's a lot of good short games on there, like Cthulhu Saves the World and Breath of Death 7.
Ftl Faster Than Light. That's another good indie game. That's pretty short.
I have FTL. That was, I think, given to. I think I bought it in a Humble Bundle, and I haven't played it.
You will enjoy it, Brian. I think it's For those who haven't played, it's a roguelike sci-fi. I guess strategy game would probably be the best way to describe it. Because if you don't pause the game a lot, it's very difficult. But if you pause the game, think about it for a second, and plan out what you're going to be shooting at, it's pretty fun. Just to watch, like, you zipping across the galaxy to stop the Rebel Alliance from blowing up your main headquarters.
What else? I'm currently working my way through Shovel Knight. I recommend that to anybody. Anybody and everybody. There's a game I want to play, and I haven't started it yet, but I don't know how long it is because I haven't played the game. Gone Home. Which is set in the 90s and is this sort of like horror-like game. I want to pick up White Knight.
Going Home, this is where the girl comes home from college and like her house is completely empty and she's trying to figure out where everyone is.
Yep.
I think. Okay, if memory serves, it's like 4 hours long.
You know, feel free to throw in any game that, you know, Rin or Wyatt you can think of. Evo Land, that's a fun one. That took me like 4 or 5 hours, but Evo Land is great because, as is evidenced in the title, you play through the game and it evolves in various styles of RPG. And you unlock RPG elements through the course of the game. Like, you will start on like this 8-bit screen with no color, and you'll open the first treasure chest, and like, you've unlocked color, you've unlocked sound, and then, you know, you've unlocked 16-bit style, and the battle system will go from, you know, hack and slash on the screen to Final Fantasy active time battle setup to something like The Legend of Zelda and then Diablo, and it goes through all these different RPG styles, and it's very, very cool. Not bad for 5 hours of play at all.
yeah, that's one of the kind of the fun things is trying to figure out, the value. Is it because they're giving you something new? Is it because you enjoyed it? Something I definitely feel like should be brought up are those games that we, were a full price game, $40, $50, or $60, that are still worth the price to us. Not just the indie games, because indie games can be quote unquote cheating because they're generally cheaper.
That's true. Although I remember buying Chrono Cross for full price. I remember that.
For me, some of the Resident Evils. I remember Resident Evil GameCube Edition, the remake of the first one. I remember playing it with Antonella and taking our sweet time. We beat it in, I think, a night and a half, but it was still worth every freaking penny from the times we screamed at each other. The other one that I didn't want to bring up is Slave: Journey to the West, which I feel like was a mostly game that was an independent property game that had some really cool ideas. It was kind of taking Monkey Journey to the West and turning it into a post-apocalyptic wasteland that had Andy Serkis doing voice acting and a lot of motion capture, and it was so good. People said, "Oh, it's too short. It's a little bit too different," but we still want to have independent property games. I love that game, and I wish that in a different environment it should have been raised up a little bit more than it was.
That's fair, because I did enjoy that game. I remember you've recommended it, and I ended up buying it and playing it. But also, while you're on the subject of, underrated games, as well as short but for AAA, Eternal Darkness. Which
if you were going to say it, I was.
Which I still play. I've beaten that game a handful of times, and I still play it.
Someone double checking on this. Okami is
Capcom
12 hours? I want to say. Am I wrong in that time estimate?
On what?
On beating Okami.
No, I've never played Okami.
I think Okami was like 12 hours. I could be wrong in that. But this was a game that was $60 on the PS2, so...
What was I going to... I just had it and it set my tongue and then it vanished. I hate when that happens. It'll come back eventually. Probably at 4 a.m. in a blinding vision. I just had it. I just saw you. God damn it. Meh. Whatever. It was funny because these full price games that I bought when I had a PS1, I just bought. There was a PlayStation Network just did a flash sale this past weekend, the weekend of the 22nd, March 22nd, and I bought 5 PS1 games for less than $5. Whereas I spent, $200 total when these games came out initially, like Dino Crisis and Siphon Filter,
Breath of Fire 4.
And I'm like, what the fuck? I bought these games for $50 new when they came out, and now PlayStation Network has the balls to charge 96 cents?
To be fair, when you bought them, they're like 15 years old, right?
Well, yes. But I mean, Dino Crisis 1 and 2, they're excellent games. I'm replaying them now. They're 6 hours or less. And I know you mentioned Bioshock, though, in the first half, Ron, as being, a game that, wasn't really that much bang for your buck.
Now, I mentioned that Bioshock I thought was bang for my buck. Where, even though it was like an 8-hour game for me, I really enjoyed it just because the story was well done, had just enough RPG elements to keep me interested.
And
Bioshock 2 was the one that I downplayed.
Okay. Because when And Wyatt mentioned this, people who rail against games being too short. Bioshock Infinite also had that problem as well by some reviewers and some gamers as like, $60 too short. And just for everything that's in that game, if you've ever played Bioshock Infinite, for everything that's in that game, and no, just immediately throw up the too short flag. I'm like, really?
The issue I had with Bioshock Infinite is that they give the impression that you're going to be exploring a lot more, and certainly there is some elements for you, or not elements, like chances for you to explore the Columbia, but by and large, it's kind of you just walking forward for like 10 hours.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the case though with most of the Bioshock series. I mean, it is ultimately pretty linear.
Yeah, but like they do a pretty decent job of masking the rails by and large. It's just like you kind of noticed it soon. You notice the rails a lot sooner in that game specifically. I feel just because of how open they made it seem, but like within a few hours of you like getting to Columbia and looking around, you're like, wait, I'm just walking forward a lot with occasional lefts and rights. Do I actually get to explore the rest of the city, or am I just going to be seeing small snippets of it?
I think maybe that because by Bioshock Infinite, I mean, that was the third game in the series, you were kind of, having already been in Rapture for 2 games, you kind of knew that's how the game is set up.
With Rapture, just the atmosphere of like, you can't really go exploring as much, because if you go exploring, there's a good chance you're going to run into a flooded section of the city, or worse, you're going to run into, you're at the bottom of the freaking ocean, you're going to run into an airlock.
It is true. In theory, you could fall off Columbia.
Whereas with Columbia, you can literally fall off, or like you literally see like floating buildings all around you. Like, why can't I go to the building that's got the Ferris wheel on it, or like go to the building with the windmills or something like that?
I think at that point, Irrational was getting a bit too big for its britches, but that's a whole nother rant. Because Wyatt and Rin have gone silent. We've hijacked the show.
Yeah, it's probably close time to be wrapping up anyway.
Yeah, it's like, oh, alright, but this is my show. What? I can't hijack my own show. So do you two, over there who've been quiet for a few minutes, do you have any final thoughts you want to give on this idea of quality versus quantity? Don't all jump at once. I see. All right.
I was seeing if anyone else wanted to, because I didn't want to go off another ramble. I just feel like it's, again, I'm going to kind of restate what I already said, which is I feel like the idea of quality is changing. And the cool thing about gaming right now is that since there's so many different genres and they've opened up, there's many different ways to enjoy a game. For some, it is because of the length of it and just the duration. So for me, I've actually, again, I'm going to use Final Fantasy Tactics, or that sort of like Japanese strategy RPG game, where you spend hours making the perfect team and making the perfect class system because you want to, and then you beat the game. And you purposely spend extra time. Or a massively multiplayer game where you're never going to beat it, quote unquote. I have Guild Wars 2, I've played it in months, but I still have that, or League of Legends, and I will gladly pump a few more hours into that just to feel like I'm getting a little bit better at the game or enjoy another zone, and I will appreciate it for that. And then there's some games like Bastion, like Devil May Cry, even this is another element we didn't talk about, but mobile games where I have a series of games on my iPad called Kingdom Rush, which is just like a very simple tower defense game. They're like $4 or $5, and I can beat the games relatively quickly. Rounds are only 5 or 10 minutes long. But that's the appeal for me. I enjoy them because I can play them while I'm on my lunch break. While I'm working. I feel like we have to stop trying to see a game in terms of value equals length, and instead value equals the quantity and the quality you're getting out of it. And for that, indie games are fantastic because you can make a shorter game and still feel like you're getting your money's worth because the production values don't have to feel too big. Meanwhile, AAA games feel like they still have this massive amount of content and extra modes and extra value it has to throw in there, and extra collectibles to make itself worth the $50 or $60 price tag that is being pushed onto AAA games to be made. And that's where things start to become really problematic. But I'm really happy about the revolution that's happening in indie games in terms of value, and they can develop a game and say, you know what, we put X amount of time into it, we know the game's going to be this long, let's make a price point based on that.
Well, there we go. Rin, you have anything you want to say before I put this episode to bed?
Nah, I'm good.
Rin just comes on, listens, occasionally contributes, and then goes away. But that's alright. That's alright.
I usually do it when you're desperately in need of people and you have 2 contributors.
And then there are episodes where it's just Ron and I going back and forth for an hour and a half, so, it happens. Not every topic appeals to the wide range of masses, but I do thank the people who do come on, because I always love talking about video games, regardless of who's out there. So, Wyatt, I will give you a minute or two to plug Sprites and Dice before I do all of my usual closing plugs, so go ahead.
Why, thank you. Sprites and Dice is a up-and-coming gaming journalism site. We try to kind of focus on the positivity of video games and the video game industry and the community. Kind of, the good things that are showing up is sort of like the creation of the indie gaming block and all the cool, fun development that's coming up. That's what we've been mostly focused on recently. You can find us at Sprites and Dice on Twitter. You can find us at spritesanddice.com, fully spelled out. And we're on Facebook as well as Sprites and Dice if you want to, favorite us on Facebook. We'd love that. Thank you.
Well, there you are. And also, Ben is a writer to Sprites and Dice as well, so I have to thank him for being on this episode. So, if you have any questions, comments on this episode or any other episode of Downloadable Content, you can get a hold of us a variety of ways. Facebook.com/DLContent, on Twitter at DLContent, on Tumblr, dlcpodcast.tumblr.com. You can email us at dlcontent1@gmail.com. And of course, if you have any ideas for episodes, or you want to be in an episode, please let us know. We would certainly love to have you, and of course, all episodes can be found on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher, so all the different ways to get downloadable content into your ears. So it remains for me to thank Ron, Rin, Wyatt, and Ben for being on this episode. And I am Brian, still Brian. Have a good one, everybody.